Oak Haven, Montana. The rain was coming down so hard it felt like the whole town might wash away before midnight. Water sluiced down the courthouse steps, pooling in the cracks of broken pavement, and the flag outside snapped on its line as if warning anyone who lingered to turn back. Becca Sullivan paused in the entryway, her fingers numb around the strap of a threadbare canvas bag. She looked nothing like the people waiting inside. No umbrella, no pressed clothes, no easy confidence. Her hair, pulled back in a hasty knot, dripped against the collar of a denim jacket gone soft at the elbows. Her boots were mud-caked, and her breath left small white ghosts as she pushed through the door. The reading of her father's will was scheduled for 9 a.m. sharp, but everyone was already gathered. Nathan and Jessica, her siblings, both impeccable in their tailored coats and distant expressions. They sat side by side, two figures carved from the same marble, sharing a glance as Becca entered. Not greeting her, but marking her presence. Their lawyer, Mr. Haverford, glanced up and offered a tired, professional nod. The room was silent except for the tick of a worn clock. Becca sat down on the far side, next to a hulking German shepherd whose fur bristled at the sudden movement. Harley, her father's dog, now hers. He stayed pressed against her leg, eyes sharp, body coiled in a silent readiness that matched the lines of worry at Becca's mouth. She laid her palm on his back, more for her own sake than his. Her hands shook, but not from cold. Mr. Haverford cleared his throat and began. The reading itself was mechanical. Lists, assets, legalese. Becca's mind drifted to the shape of her father's hands, the way he'd grip a wrench or smooth the dog's ears in the dark kitchen. After another night, she'd come home too late. She remembered how he had stopped waiting for her to change, but never locked the door. Jessica's voice broke through the droning. Is there much point to this? Can we move on to the bequests? Nathan smirked, eyes flitting to Becca. We're all adults here. When the old gas station was mentioned, Becca's heart thudded. Harley shifted, sensing the tension. To my daughter, Rebecca Sullivan, I leave the property known as Sullivan's Gas and Auto, with all its contents and liabilities, and my dog Harley. Jessica snorted. The gas station? That dump? Nathan leaned back, a curl to his lip. Figures. Dad always loved a lost cause. Their words barely disguised something sharper. Beneath the mockery, Becca caught the flicker of fear. Fear of what might be hidden there, what their father hadn't trusted them with. As the signatures were gathered and the last page turned, Nathan rose first. Enjoy your inheritance, sis. Hope you know how to fix a leaky roof and feed that mutt. His cologne lingered after he left, sharp and sour. Jessica followed with a shrug, not looking back. Some things can't be saved. Becca stayed until the room emptied. Mr. Haverford closed his briefcase and offered her a faint, apologetic smile. Your father had his reasons. I wish you luck, Rebecca. Luck. That was something Becca had run out of long ago. She touched Harley's head, feeling the solid shape of him beneath her palm, his gaze locked on her with the kind of trust that came only from years of quiet watching. The rain had eased to a steady drizzle as they stepped outside. Becca drove the old pickup, Harley in the passenger seat, along back roads that twisted between fields and the shadow of mountains. Oak Haven blurred past, lights glowing warm in kitchen windows, the smell of wet earth and wood smoke thick in the air. The gas station appeared around the last bend, battered but standing. Neon letters gone dark, shingles curling up like dry leaves. Harley jumped down first, nose working the air, then trotted to the side door as if he'd never left. Inside, it was colder than Becca remembered. She flipped a switch, but the lights flickered and stayed dim. Dust layered every surface. The old clock behind the register had stopped at 2:14. On the counter, a single mug, her father's, still bore the faint ring of black coffee. Becca set her bag down and sat on the cracked vinyl stool, Harley settling at her feet, his chin on her boot. She let the silence stretch. The ache in her chest deepened, a heaviness old as memory. She thought of the years she'd spent running from this town, from herself, from the war that had followed her home and carved up what little she had left. She thought of her father's silence, how it had once wounded her, then steadied her. How he had left her this last burden, a roof, a dog, and a place to belong if she wanted it. Thunder rolled in the distance. The station shuddered under the wind. That night, as Becca drifted between waking and sleep on the old cot in the office, Harley began to paw at a loose floorboard behind the counter. She roused herself, blinking into the gloom. The dog whined low, insistent. She knelt, prying at the edge with her fingertips. The board gave way with a splintering groan. Beneath, wrapped in canvas and dust, was a battered military footlocker, a lock, tarnished with age. Next to it, a journal, her father's, bound in faded green canvas. The spine cracked and the pages edged with notes in a cipher she half recognized from her own years in service. Harley pressed close, his body warm and steady. Becca stared at the secrets lying in the dirt, at the name stenciled on the trunk, at the place her father had trusted her to find. For the first time in years, curiosity flickered in her eyes, a fragile ember. She closed her hand over the key, heart beating slow and strong in the hush. Rain tapped out a patient rhythm on the roof above. Harley's breathing deepened, matching her own. And in that quiet, heavy moment, the gas station felt, just for a breath, like home. The night after the will reading did not bring rest. It brought ghosts. Wind worried at the warped glass panes of the old gas station, rattling them gently, as if someone were tapping to be let in. Oak Haven was asleep, the whole town draped under the hush that only comes in the hour before dawn. But inside, sleep never found Becca. She lay curled on the battered office cot. Harley sprawled across the floor with one ear cocked and eyes glinting in the blue dark. Outside, headlights swept past now and then, carving yellow lines on the walls before disappearing into the distance. At first, it was the silence that gnawed at her. Too complete. Too different from the muffled hum of base camps, from the constant static of radios, from the distant rumble of artillery in the corners of memory she never talked about. She rolled onto her back, studying the stains on the ceiling. One spot, above the vent, looked like a dog's paw. Harley's, maybe, or her father's idea of a joke. She closed her eyes and tried to breathe evenly, but memory, like pain, had a way of slipping past locked doors. The thirst came crawling up her throat, the old, ugly urge. One drink would quiet her mind, would loosen the knots in her chest. Her hand went to the side table where a battered thermos waited. Only coffee. Her father had never kept liquor in the station. Harley, sensing the shift, rose and pressed his head gently against her hip. His body was a solid, patient weight, neither asking nor accusing, just there. She focused on that, the slow press of his breath, the familiar rough rhythm of his tail tapping against the cot. It steadied her, kept her from drifting too far. She opened her eyes, feeling the slow ache in her hands. the tremor that came not from cold, but from memory. Around 2 in the morning, Harley growled, a low, guttural warning that sent a chill crawling down her spine. He stood, hackles bristling, nose pointed at the front of the shop. Becca listened, holding her breath. Was that footsteps crunching on gravel outside? The old neon sign buzzed faintly. She reached for the crowbar her father kept by the register, heart beating slow and hard. She moved to the doorway, Harley pressed against her leg, both of them shadows in the half-light. For a long time, nothing happened, just the wind whispering. Then, a scrape against the far window. Not animal, metal, deliberate. She froze, every muscle drawn tight. Harley barked once, sharp and furious. Whoever was out there moved back, fast. She heard a muttered curse, the sound of feet slipping on wet pavement. Then nothing. She stood for a long moment in the hush, the crowbar heavy in her hand, Harley still tense at her side. When the silence settled again, she forced herself to breathe. The urge to run, just leave, grab the truck and disappear, burned hot, but Harley stayed, blocking the door, eyes fixed on hers. The message was clear. Don't go. In the faint light of morning, she checked the windows. Mud smeared the lower panes, a handprint blurred at the edge of the frame. Someone had tried to force the lock on the back door. They had been searching for something, maybe the same secrets her siblings feared. Later that day, Becca sat in the office, the military footlocker open at her feet. The journal lay across her lap, the pages bristling with numbers and scribbled notes, code she almost recognized, old habits from years spent breaking enemy signals. She traced a finger over the ink, remembering her father's hands, how they'd move steady and sure, even when everything else trembled. Harley sat nearby, chin on his paws, watching the room as if waiting for danger to return. She spoke aloud, not to the dog, but to the empty air. Why would you hide all this from us, Dad? Her voice was rough, softer than the sound of tires on wet road. What were you so afraid of? The journal's cipher was clear. Military, not civilian. Coordinates, dates, cryptic references to payloads and transfers. Harley whined, his tail thumping once as if to urge her on. You're the only reason I'm still here, you know that? She murmured, glancing down at him. The confession felt strange on her tongue, but right. Harley blinked, unmoved. The past had taught him patience. By dusk, a fresh unease crawled over her skin. Strangers lingered near the fence line. 2 men in worn jackets, heads bent together, eyes never quite meeting hers. Harley watched them through the window, the fur along his back prickling. When they moved closer, he barked, deep and resonant. They hesitated, then melted away into the dark, leaving behind nothing but cigarette smoke and boot prints in the gravel. Becca bolted the doors and drew the blinds. She turned on the radio, searching for music, anything to drown out the rising tide of memory and fear. It was useless. The station's walls seemed to close in, every shadow hinting at old betrayals, every creak a reminder of secrets left buried. At midnight, a crash from the storeroom jolted her awake. Harley tore down the hallway, teeth bared. Becca followed, heart in her throat, crowbar at the ready. In the flickering light, a figure scrambled through the broken window. A boy, desperate and wild-eyed. Harley lunged, pinning the intruder to the floor with practiced force. Becca shouted, calling him off, hands shaking as she dialed 911. The boy sobbed, insisting he meant no harm, that he just needed a place to sleep. But Becca's instincts, sharpened by years of war and grief, read the truth in his eyes. He was searching for something. Someone had sent him. The police arrived, questions flying. Harley remained a sentinel at Becca's side, never blinking, never wavering. The boy was taken away, the broken window boarded up, but Becca could still feel the chill of unseen eyes on the back of her neck. That night, as rain began again, Harley pressed his head into her lap, anchoring her in the dark. For the first time in years, she felt needed. Not because she was broken, not because she was running, but because someone, something, trusted her to stay. And outside, under the slow, steady rhythm of the rain, Oak Haven kept its secrets. But Becca, for a fleeting moment, found strength in simply being needed, in being, finally, seen. The days blurred together in Oak Haven. Out past the old Sinclair sign, late winter sun carved thin gold lines across the frost-tinged fields. Inside the station, time slowed, softened, and then nearly stopped. Becca settled into the rhythms of the place, if they could be called rhythms at all. Every morning, she let Harley out to patrol the cracked pavement, watching as he sniffed at the edges of broken fences, pausing sometimes. Nose to the wind, as if searching for something lost. She swept up the leaves that gathered at the corners of the garage bay. She made bad coffee, drank it standing in the half-light of the office, her hands wrapped around the mug like it might anchor her. The footlocker sat open on the floor, a constant presence. The battered journal lay across her knees, its pages bristling with coded lines and the faint scent of oil and old leather. Most nights she fell asleep with it in her lap, the cipher spinning in her mind, the shapes and patterns just out of reach. Her father's handwriting was neat, measured. Every number, every symbol felt like a puzzle box he'd left behind for her alone. Some evenings, with dusk pooling in the corners and the air growing cold, Becca found herself talking aloud, not to the world, but to Harley, who lay stretched out at her feet, his chest rising and falling in the quiet. "You ever wonder if you're supposed to fix what they leave behind?" she'd ask, voice barely more than a whisper. Harley would look up, eyes reflecting the soft lamplight, silent and unwavering. In those moments, the dog was more comfort than any prayer or bottle had ever been. The guilt never faded. She felt it like a cold coin in her pocket. The guilt of coming home when others hadn't. The guilt of drifting from her father in his final years. Of hiding too long in motel rooms and cheap whiskey. Of being the one left behind after Ryan's death. Sometimes at night, she'd dream of Ryan's laugh, the wild sound of it echoing through mountain canyons, gone before she could catch it. One morning, Harley pawed at the footlocker, tail thumping. Becca knelt, brushing dust from a stack of maps tucked beneath the journal. She froze. Between two faded pages, a small brass key glinted in the weak sunlight. There was a number engraved on it. 141B. She pressed the key into her palm, heart pounding in her throat. The code in the journal, rows and columns, suddenly snapped into focus. Her father hadn't just been hiding old paperwork. These were blueprints, diagrams of the gas station itself, layered with annotations and arrows. The last few pages detailed a hatch beneath the garage, a space she'd never noticed, marked only, "For Becca, if you need it, you'll know." She traced the lines on the blueprint, the maze of wires and panels. The careful way her father had disguised a world beneath the world she'd always known. She laughed, but it came out more like a cough, half joy, half disbelief. That afternoon, rain tapped against the tin roof, filling the station with the gentle hush of water on metal. Becca took Harley outside, the key warm in her hand. They circled the building, her boots crunching over gravel and broken glass. She paused at the far wall, beneath the busted neon letters. There, beneath a patch of rotting boards, she found it. A metal hatch, almost invisible in the shadowed concrete. She crouched, fitting the brass key into the lock. Harley pressed close, tail wagging. The lock gave with a tired click, and the hatch swung open, cold air rushing up from below. A steel ladder vanished into darkness. Harley peered over the edge, ears pricked. Becca hesitated, then descended, feeling the rungs chill bite into her palms. Harley waited above, silent, sentinel. She reached the bottom, flashlight beam catching on metal walls lined with dust and rows of old supply crates. The air was thick, tinged with oil, secrets, and something older, fear, maybe, or hope. She turned in a slow circle, heart hammering. At the far end, a battered desk. On it, a stack of tapes, labeled in her father's hand. For Rebecca, for when you're ready. She didn't touch them, not yet. Instead, she climbed back up into the light, knees trembling. Not from fear, but from the sudden rush of purpose that filled her lungs. That night, Becca sat with Harley by the cot, journal open on her lap, blueprints spread across the table. She traced her father's lines, memorizing the path from the past to the future. She spoke aloud, the words falling easy, almost like prayer. You kept me alive, you know that? She scratched Harley behind the ears. If you hadn't barked that first night, if you weren't here, I might never have found any of this. Harley licked her hand, eyes shining in the lamp's dim glow. He shifted closer, laying his head across her knees. In his silent company, the world grew softer, the wounds of old betrayals and lost friends less jagged. The guilt remained. Some hurts never left, but so did a sense of movement, of momentum. She wasn't just surviving, she was searching. The old gas station was still battered, still haunted, but now there was something beneath it, an engine humming quietly, waiting for the right hands to set it in motion. Outside, the storm had eased. Oak Haven's night was deep and blue, the hush broken only by the soft breathing of a woman and her dog, piecing together a puzzle that might, just might, be the beginning of something new. It was barely dawn when Becca found herself standing alone in the half-lit garage, the hatch to the bunker open at her feet. Harley sat beside her, watching the morning seep through dirty window glass, his ears pricked for sounds that didn't belong. There was a feeling to this moment she couldn't name, a quiet gravity, like the pause before a verdict is read, or the breath a soldier holds before stepping into the unknown. She knelt by the hatch, fingers tracing the metal rung where rainwater had left its ghostly stain. The blueprint from her father's journal lay open on the workbench, corners curling in the damp air. Beneath the hatch, darkness coiled thick and cool. Harley whined softly, not in fear but in question, like he understood what she was about to face. She descended, one careful rung at a time, her boots echoing on the steel ladder. The air grew colder, sharper, the smell of oil and old metal swallowing up the last of the outside world. When her feet touched the concrete floor, she paused, hand tight on the flashlight, heart beating slow and loud in her ears. The beam cut across the room, metal shelving stacked with ammo cans and rations, maps rolled into battered tubes, a radio set with wires trailing like dried veins. At the far end, beneath a sheet of heavy canvas, sat a desk. The chair behind it was empty, but Becca could almost picture her father sitting there, hunched over his codes, his silence a shield against the world. She moved slowly, every step measured, as if her weight might wake the ghosts that lived here. Harley followed, padding across the cold floor, his body pressed close enough for her to feel the steady thrum of his presence. She rested her hand on his head. Together, they made their way to the desk. On its surface, a series of videotapes labeled in block letters: Ryan, 2013, Becca, Iraq, Nathan, OP Vigil, Final, alongside a battered laptop, its casing scratched by years of use. Becca hesitated, her breath fogging in the dim, then reached for the tape marked Final. A deep, familiar ache opened in her chest. She knew what this was, the last things he couldn't say aloud. She found an old monitor, plugged it in, and set the tape running. Her father's face flickered onto the screen, older than she remembered. Lines carved deep by years in the field, eyes tired but burning with something she hadn't seen in years. He spoke with the slow, careful cadence of someone who knows every word might be his last. "If you're watching this, Becca," he began, "then you've found what I never meant for anyone else to find. I never thought I'd be the kind of man who kept secrets from his children. But here we are." He paused, gaze falling to his hands. "I know what I've done wasn't always right. I know what the war took from you, from me, from Ryan. But I need you to understand why I built this place, why I kept it hidden. Some things, Becca, don't belong in the light until someone's strong enough to carry them." He glanced up, as if looking directly through the screen, through the years. "You were always the strong one, even when you didn't know it." The screen flickered, and the tape ended with a hollow click. Becca sat back, the old chair creaking under her weight, tears burning her eyes in the dim light. She pressed her hands to her face, trying to catch her breath. Harley nudged her leg with his nose, then climbed awkwardly onto her lap, his bulk nearly tipping her off the chair. She let out a broken laugh and buried her face in his fur. It was the first time she'd let herself cry in years, not as a soldier, not as a survivor, but as a daughter. Just a daughter, grieving the father she'd never really known. She stayed that way for a long time, Harley's warmth steady against her chest, until the cold crept up her back and the bunker seemed to breathe with her sorrow. She wiped her eyes, stood, and looked again at what her father had left behind. Stacks of files, coded manifests, and one final sealed envelope, her name scrawled across it in his rough hand. Inside, she found documents, proof of black operations spanning decades, evidence of fortunes quietly amassed through a life lived in the shadows. There was enough here to make, or ruin, lives. She stared at the papers, questions swirling. Was this what Nathan and Jessica feared? Was this the reason for their greed, their sudden interest in a broken-down gas station? Or was there something even deeper? A wound in their own hearts, a hunger that would never be filled by money or power. Harley paced the floor, circling back to her side, pressing close as if to say, "It doesn't matter. You're here. I'm here. We made it this far." Standing in that bunker, the weight of secrets and loss heavy in her hands, Becca felt something loosen deep inside. For the first time since she'd come home from the war, she felt not just the ache of old wounds, but the faint spark of purpose. A reason to stay. A reason to fight. A reason to care. She left the bunker as the sun broke over the ridge, the light outside sharp and gold, the station washed clean by rain. She climbed the ladder and pulled Harley up beside her, breathing in the cold, pine-scented air. The world hadn't changed. The war was still in her bones. But she was ready, maybe for the first time to answer whatever it asked of her. In the silence that followed, Harley circled once, curled at her feet, and closed his eyes. She watched him, gratitude rising like a tide. For a moment, neither of them moved. Outside, Oak Haven woke slow and uncertain, the world above ground shifting toward another day. Below, in the darkness, a legacy waited, not to be hidden, but to be used. The air changed in Oak Haven, though most people wouldn't have noticed. A hard blue wind swept down from the mountains, scraping the last of the frost from the eaves and carrying with it the scent of thawing earth and gasoline. Becca stood out front of the gas station, a battered broom in her hand, sweeping broken glass from the edge of the lot. Harley roamed the perimeter, tail high and alert, paws cutting silent tracks through the mud. The sun sat low behind the trees, casting long, silver shadows over the pumps. It was too early for tourists, too late for anyone with real business. Becca liked it that way. She'd grown used to the quiet, used to the way Harley's footsteps filled the emptiness, to the sound of her own breath as she worked, to the simple certainty of moving from one small task to the next. But change has a way of announcing itself, even in a town as slow and stubborn as Oak Haven. Just after noon, a white SUV turned onto the lot, tires crunching over gravel. Becca kept sweeping, pretending not to notice as the car rolled to a stop in front of the office. Nathan stepped out, his suit immaculate despite the dust. He left the engine running, music thumping behind the tinted glass. Jessica followed, high boots spotless, eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses. They didn't greet Becca, didn't need to. Their presence was declaration enough. Harley positioned himself between Becca and the car, body tense, every muscle ready. Nathan walked up, hands spread in a gesture meant to look open, but his jaw was set hard. "We need to talk," he said. Becca didn't answer. She bent and swept another pile of glass toward the gutter. Nathan's shoes left prints in the dust, moving closer. "This isn't how Dad wanted things, you know," he tried, voice tight, but softer than before. Jessica hovered by the car, arms crossed. The words didn't matter. Becca heard what lay beneath them: fear, envy, desperation. The weight of secrets was visible in the slump of Nathan's shoulders, the way Jessica's foot tapped out a nervous rhythm against the curb. Inside, Harley growled, a sound low and private. Nathan took a step back, but recovered quickly, voice sharp. "You should sell. This place, the land, it's worth more than you realize. Don't be stupid, Becca. Don't make this harder for all of us." Becca said nothing. She didn't look up. Her hands kept working, sweeping broken glass, one small action at a time. The silence grew. Jessica shifted, biting her lip. She glanced at Harley, then at Becca, then back at the car, searching for something softer, but finding nothing. Nathan's frustration broke the spell. "You think you're the only one Dad trusted? You think he didn't leave anything for us?" His voice cracked, the veneer of control slipping. "He made us promises, too." Becca straightened, the broom still in her grip. She looked at her brother, really looked at him, saw the years of wanting and not having, the longing for approval that never came. For a moment she felt the old ache return, the urge to apologize, to reach out. But Harley pressed his body against her leg, anchoring her to the ground. Nathan's face shifted, grief, anger, something like defeat. He turned away, motioned for Jessica, and together they drove off, dust swirling in the SUV's wake. Becca stood still, the world settling around her, her heart beating in the quiet that followed. The day passed in a hush, the wind scouring the lot clean, the sun working its way behind the pines. Becca went inside, Harley trailing her, nails clicking on the worn tile. She made coffee, black and strong, and stood at the window, watching as the clouds thickened. The tapes and documents from the bunker weighed on her mind. Evidence, enough to buy safety or paint a target on her back. She turned the radio low, filling the silence with a voice softer than her own. Outside, a pickup truck rolled to a stop by the back fence. Becca's body tensed, but Harley had already moved to the door, tail up, bark muffled but certain. It wasn't police. Not locals. Two men in flannel and battered jeans climbed out, eyes scanning the property with the quick, calculating movements of men who never stay anywhere long. One tapped on the glass with the back of his ring. 3 measured knocks. Becca didn't move. She watched from behind the curtain as they circled the lot, pausing by the garage, muttering to each other. Harley's head followed their every move, body coiled and ready. After a few minutes, the men disappeared around the corner, and the only trace of them was a set of muddy prints and a single crushed cigarette in the gravel. Evening settled in. The last light faded from the sky, painting the station in bruised purple and blue. Becca locked the doors, checked the windows, and sat at the desk with Harley at her feet. She pulled out her father's journal, hands steady now, the fear receding beneath something harder, a resolve she hadn't known she could still muster. She read late into the night, mapping the hidden lines of her father's world, tracing the path from his past into her present. Harley's breathing filled the darkness, slow and sure. At some point she fell asleep at the desk, head pillowed on folded arms, the journal still open, Harley's nose pressed against her elbow. When she woke before dawn, nothing in the world had changed, except perhaps her willingness to remain. Outside, Oak Haven was quiet again, holding its breath for whatever came next. Inside, Becca and Harley waited together, ready for the knock at the door that always comes, sooner or later, when you decide to stay. Night thickened around Oak Haven like wool, pressing in at the windows and swallowing the hum of passing cars. The gas station became a ship marooned in a sea of dark, its neon sign flickering to itself, a heartbeat for no one but the woman and her dog. Becca drifted in and out of sleep at the desk, the lamp throwing a puddle of yellow across scattered papers and the crumpled receipt for more coffee she'd never bought. Her dreams had a taste: wood smoke, cold metal, the static of radios she could no longer tune out. In some she was running, in others just watching, as life slipped by outside a pane of glass. Harley slept on the floor beside her, his breath a soft rise and fall. Sometime past midnight, he woke, a twitch, a low whine. Becca stirred, her hand reaching out instinctively. Fingers brushing his thick ruff. He pushed up, nose to the air, tense, listening. She listened too, not with ears, but with all the years spent knowing when a room changed, when a silence grew teeth. There was nothing at first. Then the faintest scrape at the back door, a slow, deliberate sound, someone testing the lock. Becca held her breath, heart settling into the old, familiar rhythm, steady, cold, certain. She didn't reach for the phone. She went instead to the supply closet, took the crowbar, and crept down the hall. Harley pressed close and silent as a shadow. The door held, but the tension lingered. She saw a shape through the glass, only a shoulder, a hand, retreating into the dark. Harley's growl was a warning. Not now, but soon. She waited, standing barefoot on cold tile, until the quiet returned. Then she went back to the office, boots unlaced, crowbar at her side. Harley curled on the rug, never taking his eyes off the hallway. They waited together, the minutes stretching out, rain beginning to tap against the windows, steady as breath. With dawn came a strange, pale hush. The world outside was wet, the air heavy with the promise of spring, but not yet warm enough to melt the hard edges of winter. Becca made coffee, 2 mugs, one for her, one poured into an old steel bowl for Harley. He lapped at it, then sat at the door, watching the world wake. There were days now when Becca thought less about leaving. The ache in her chest no longer felt like emptiness, but more like room for something, maybe, to take root. She worked in the yard, clearing brush, fixing the broken gutter, sanding the old sign where the letters had faded. Sometimes, as she swept, she caught sight of Harley at the edge of the lot, ears up, alert. She followed his gaze but saw only crows, the far-off glint of a neighbor's truck. One afternoon, the mailman, old Henry, with his limp and sun-bleached cap, left a package at the front counter. No return address. Becca signed for it, hands smudged with oil and the metallic tang of old tools. She carried it inside, opened it with the small folding knife she'd kept since Iraq. Inside, a stack of photographs, edges curled with age. At first she thought them random. Snapshots of the town in winter, the gas station dusted with snow, her father standing in the doorway, expression half-shadowed by the brim of his hat. But beneath those were older photos, grainy, black and white, men and dogs in uniform, some faces marked with grease pencil, others blurred by time. In one, a young soldier crouched beside a German shepherd, hand resting lightly on the animal's neck. The resemblance was unmistakable. Harley's lineage, perhaps, or just another ghost running alongside hers. She laid the pictures out across the desk, tracing the lines of her father's life, the history he'd never spoken of. Harley jumped up, putting his paws on the edge of the desk, nose pressed to one of the faded images. Becca smiled, slow and quiet, and placed her hand over his. The moment was small, unremarkable, a kind of peace you don't notice until it's there. The days fell into a gentle routine. Locals began to drift in again, drawn by habit more than need. Mrs. Doyle, whose car always rattled in the cold, brought a bag of apples and left them on the counter. The sheriff stopped by to ask if she'd seen any strangers near the old railroad tracks. Teenagers snuck snacks, leaving coins on the counter and laughter in their wake. Becca found herself talking more, sometimes only to Harley, sometimes to customers, sometimes just to the room itself. At night, when the quiet pressed hardest, she'd sit by the window with Harley at her feet, the radio low, her father's journal in her lap. She would listen to the wind, to the ticking of the clock, to the sound of Harley's paws shifting in sleep. Some wounds did not close, not really. They faded, became part of the shape of a person. She felt that now, as the edges of her old life softened. When the phone rang late one evening, she let it go to voicemail, trusting that nothing urgent waited in the dark. Instead, she took Harley outside, the sky silver with stars, the air crisp with the scent of pine. He ran ahead, circling the lot, pausing every so often to look back, to make sure she was still there. She followed him, boots crunching on gravel, her breath white in the air. They stood together at the edge of the property, the world silent except for the whisper of the wind and the distant creak of old wood settling. Harley leaned against her leg, and Becca, for the first time in longer than she could remember, stood still and let the silence settle around her. Not as a threat, but as an answer. What remained was not certainty, not even hope. Just this, the weight of a dog at her side, the steady rise and fall of his breath, and the quiet knowledge that they were, for now, exactly where they needed to be. A storm had rolled in from the north, smearing the mountains gray. Rain drummed on the roof all night, relentless and patient, until by morning, puddles pooled along the cracks in the asphalt. Becca stood at the office window, mug warming her hands, Harley's fur damp against her calf, where he waited for the door to open. A truck rumbled down the highway, taillights flickering in and out of fog. The world felt far away, flattened by distance and wet glass, as if she were looking at her own life from outside. Harley huffed softly and pushed his nose against the door. Becca finished her coffee, pulled on a faded jacket, and together they stepped out beneath the awning. The rain had eased, but the air was heavy. Water beaded on Harley's back, rolled down Becca's sleeve. She walked the lot with him, checking the edges of the property. Muddy footprints marked the place where the fence met the tree line, a different pattern than hers. Wide-set, heavy, boots not made for walking quiet. She bent, studied the print, and rose without a word, gaze sweeping the silent woods. She felt it before she saw it, the old feeling just below her ribs, that someone was watching. She let Harley take the lead, circling wide, sniffing the grass. He paused at the dumpster, ears sharp, tail stiff, then looked back at her as if to say, "Pay attention." A dark streak ran through the mud by the fence, a tire mark, sharp and recent, carved through last night's rain, not local. Becca lingered, letting her breath settle, letting the questions come, but not hurrying them. She walked back inside, boots tracking damp onto the tile. Harley shook himself dry, then curled in his usual spot beneath the window, eyes following her every move. She unlocked the back office, took her father's journal from the drawer, and laid it flat. The bunker key sat beside it, the weight of it a steady reminder. Her fingers traced the old codes, the notes he'd left in the margins. She had read it all, cover to cover, searching for answers, finding only more layers, motives inside motives, trust spun tight as wire. Mid-morning brought a lull. The highway stayed empty, clouds pressing low. Becca sorted invoices, restocked shelves, wiped the old clock face, though it had not worked since her father's last winter. These rituals had become her anchor, the simple chores of staying. But ritual wasn't armor. By noon, a patrol car slowed at the curb, tires spitting water. Sheriff McLean stepped out, his face weathered, hands tucked deep in his coat. He walked the lot, pausing at the mud by the fence. Harley rose, a low rumble deep in his chest. "Morning," the sheriff said, nodding, eyes lingering on the tire tracks. He didn't ask, not at first. Just looked, the way men do when they want you to fill in the silence. Becca shrugged, hands in her pockets. "Had some visitors. Didn't come in." McLean studied her, the old lines in his face settling. "You get any plates?" She shook her head. Harley pressed against her thigh, silent sentinel. "Just keep an eye out," McLean said finally, voice quiet. "Lot of folks passing through, some looking for easy trouble." He didn't say more. He didn't need to. They stood together in the rain for a moment, both listening to the hush, to the sound of water slipping from the eaves, to the secret rustle of wind in the pine. Then McLean tipped his hat and left, patrol car disappearing down the road, his absence leaving a space Becca couldn't quite fill. Inside, the light was thin and blue. Harley lay at her feet, head on his paws. She found herself drifting back to memories of sand and heat, of voices on radios and the hard edge of fear that never really leaves. She remembered Ryan's quiet way, the way he would sit beside her in silence and let the world settle around them. No need to name what hurt. The day wore on. Rain came and went, clouds shifting, light never truly returning. Afternoon brought a delivery van, a man with a clipboard, damp hair pasted to his forehead. He left boxes by the door, nodded at Harley, and drove away without a word. Ordinary things, ordinary people. But the world was never only what it appeared. At dusk, as Becca locked the doors and turned the sign to closed, she felt the weight of it, a tension in the air, a question asked, but not answered. She fed Harley, made a dinner she barely tasted, and sat at the desk with the lamp low, her father's journal open to a fresh page. She wrote, not for answers, but for steadiness. A list of what was known, what was suspected, what could not yet be faced. Harley circled once, curled by her chair, and slept. Outside, night crept back in. A single car passed on the highway, its headlights tracing ghostly lines across the blinds. In the hush, Becca breathed, not waiting for danger, not wishing for rescue, only present. Her dog at her side. The world pressing close and then receding, the unseen line between past and present holding, if only for now. She turned out the light, sat with Harley, listening to the rain, let the quiet be enough. The air sharpened overnight. Sometime before dawn, a new cold moved in, crisper, more alert, the kind that creeps through the smallest crack and lifts the hair on your arms before your mind knows why. Becca lay awake on the office cot, Harley curled against her knees. She'd learned to tell the difference between the hush that meant safety and the silence that meant something was coming. This was the second kind. Air pressed flat, breath held, the station itself waiting. She sat up, careful not to wake Harley, and moved through the building in thick socks, checking the locks with slow, practiced hands. Rain had washed the world clean, but not the unease. She made coffee, left the back porch light on, and waited for morning to mean something again. It was nearly 8 before the first car appeared, a blue sedan she didn't recognize. It slowed, idled at the curb, then continued. Harley sat by the window, head tilted, watching. A stray cat crossed the lot, vanishing beneath the fence. She watched the shadows for movement, but nothing came. Sometimes the threat was just in your mind. Sometimes that was enough. Mid-morning brought the sheriff again. Only this time it wasn't McLean, just one of the deputies, a new face, eyes young, hands uncertain. He asked if she'd seen anyone out of place, if there'd been trouble. She lied, said no, all's well, because she could not yet name what she feared. She worked through the day, restocking shelves, oiling the squeak from the garage bay door, fixing a flickering bulb above the register. Small things, but they mattered. Harley's gaze tracked her every movement, a silent rhythm of watchfulness. She read his signals, trusted the invisible thread that had drawn her to this place and now kept her anchored. He paced more than usual, spent long stretches by the rear exit, ears pricked, still as stone. At dusk, the wind shifted again. The sky was low and bruised, the world made small by the pressing dark. Becca stood at the counter counting bills when the back door rattled. Once, twice. Not wind. Someone was testing it. She didn't move. She let the moment stretch, her breath shallow, heart slow. Harley rose beside her, hackles high, growl deep in his chest. Becca reached under the counter, hand closing around the cool iron of the crowbar. The door fell silent. She moved toward the office, drew the blinds, dimmed the lights. Outside, footsteps crossed gravel, one set, then another. Voices, low and urgent, drifted through the walls. Harley's growl grew sharper, body tense and ready. A loud crack, glass at the rear storeroom window. The sound was clean, surgical, not an accident. Someone climbed through, boots landing soft on linoleum. Becca listened, one, then two. She stayed behind the door, counting heartbeats. Harley pressed to her side, his whole body quivering with focus. She waited until she could hear them moving. Quick, practiced, not searching for goods, but for something hidden. She pictured the bunker hatch, the files, the tapes, the last traces of her father's secret life. The intruders moved down the hall, a voice sharp and uncertain. "Check the office," another. "Be quick, she's not supposed to be here now." Harley stiffened, his head dropped low. Becca's hands were steady. She flicked off the safety on the bear spray canister, stepped into the hallway, Harley at her heel. There was no fight. Just two men, faces obscured by caps, turning in the sudden light, caught out by the dog and the woman with the set jaw and iron in her grip. They froze, not expecting resistance, not expecting Harley's presence. He barked, low and guttural, and both men stepped back, one tripping over a chair, the other pulling a short knife. Becca did not speak. She raised the canister, leveled her gaze. Harley advanced, the snarl in his chest unmistakable. In the hush that followed, something shifted, a silent calculation, the line between intent and action. One man bolted for the window, crashing through, glass splintering. The other hesitated, knife raised, eyes wide and unsure. Becca pressed the spray, a burst of chemical fire. The man screamed, dropped the knife, staggered backward, and fled. Harley lunged, but Becca held him back. She locked the door, breathing fast, and stood still for a long time. The only sound Harley's furious pant and the ticking of the broken clock. After a while, she picked up the knife with a dish towel, dropped it into a bag, and checked every lock, every window. She didn't call the sheriff, not yet. Instead, she cleaned up the glass, wiped the floor, put on the kettle. Harley sat at her feet, still bristling, but calmer now. They spent the night in the office, cot pushed up against the door, the crowbar within reach. Becca read from her father's journal. Harley's nose pressed to her thigh. The old fear lingered, but so did a new clarity. Whoever wanted what was hidden here was getting bolder, and she could no longer pretend the threat was only memory. Morning came slow, gray and thin. The town beyond the lot was waking, none the wiser. Becca stood on the porch, Harley beside her, both marked by the long night. She watched the light grow, felt the ache in her bones, the grit beneath her nails. The world had not ended. The dog was still with her. She breathed in, let the morning settle, and began again. The world the next morning was sharp and brittle, as if the night's events had cleared the last haze of winter from the air. Sunlight spilled through the battered blinds, painting the desk in gold and dust. Becca sat at the window, hands wrapped around a mug that had gone cold an hour ago. Harley's chin pressed to her knee. Sleep had been a broken thing, brief, shallow, never enough to close the ache behind her eyes. She watched the lot fill with light. Even the birds seemed cautious, flitting low to the ground, their calls muffled by the residue of what lingered. There was no aftermath in the news, no mention of break-ins or trespassers. In Oak Haven, trouble was always a rumor, never a headline. But she felt it. The way people paused before coming inside. The way old Mrs. Doyle lingered by the apple bins, eyes flicking to the broken glass beneath the rear window before she pretended not to see. By noon, Becca had swept up the shards, replaced the lock, taped cardboard over the storeroom window. She kept the knife, cleaned, wrapped, and stowed in the bottom of a drawer, its presence a promise she never meant to make. She moved through the day slower than usual, measuring her breath, checking corners. Harley shadowed her everywhere, restless, needing to be where he could see her. That afternoon, the phone rang. She let it ring, watched the red light pulse until the sound stopped. She had no words for the police, no trust left for official comforts. Instead, she gathered her father's journal, the bunker key, a handful of the oldest photographs, and slipped them into her pack. She left the station in Harley's care, locked the door behind her, checked it twice. The road out of town was soft with thaw and silence. She walked the back way, boots sinking in last year's leaves, Harley ranging ahead, never out of sight. The woods were waking, a hush of sap. The glimmer of new green pushing through moss. Every so often Harley would pause, nose in the air, tail quivering with alertness. She trusted him more than she trusted her own sense of safety now. There was a clearing up past the quarry, a place her father had shown her as a child, a stand of birch, a low circle of stones, a place that had always felt out of reach, but close to something that mattered. She moved through the trees with Harley at her side, the world shrinking to the steady crunch of earth underfoot and the dog's quiet breath. At the center of the clearing, she stopped, set her pack down, sat cross-legged on the cool grass. Harley lay beside her, his body pressed close. She pulled out the journal, the photographs, the old brass key. She spread them before her, letting the wind flip the pages, scatter the images. She let herself remember. The years she'd spent running, the war that lived beneath her skin. The voice of her father echoing down the tunnel of memory. Never gentle, but never truly gone. She thought of the nights alone in the station, of the long ache of wanting to belong, and of the comfort she'd found, unexpectedly, in the weight of a dog's head on her knee. Harley nudged the photographs with his nose, then curled around them, as if guarding secrets older than either of them. She laid her hand on his back, feeling the warmth, the heartbeat, the steady promise. Here now, still together. She took out the journal, read her father's final entries. They weren't confessions or apologies, just a record, places, dates, fragments of regret scattered among instructions. How to find the hatch, how to use the radio, how to vanish if ever necessary. He'd left her a map, but not a guide. A trail, but no assurance of what waited at its end. It struck her then, sitting in that sunlight-dappled circle, that every secret was a wound, and every wound a door. She'd carried her father's secrets, her own, all these years, not to protect him or even herself, but because the weight was familiar, and she was afraid of what would happen if she set it down. Harley pressed closer, sighing, his breath stirring the grass. Becca looked out across the clearing, the world quiet, sky wide and forgiving. She let herself grieve, not just for her father, but for all the selves she'd been. Soldier, daughter, lost thing, survivor. The sun crept along her shoulder, warming the ache beneath her ribs. She didn't cry, She simply sat, letting the hours slip by. Harley dozed and woke, ears flicking at every shift of wind. The day faded slow and sure, shadows lengthening, the air cooling to blue. As dusk gathered, Becca packed the journal, photographs, and key back into her bag. She stood, stretching the ache from her legs, and turned for home. Harley trotted ahead, pausing at the edge of the woods, glancing back as if to make sure she was coming. The walk back was quiet. No need for words. By the time the station's neon flickered into sight, the sky was silvered with stars. The world rinsed clean, if only for a night. Inside, she made tea, Harley circling 3 times before settling on his blanket. She sat by the window, the journal unopened on the table, and watched the dark hold steady beyond the glass. In the clearing, the stones held the last of the day's warmth. Somewhere deep beneath the earth, her father's secrets waited, undisturbed. In the station, Harley breathed, and Becca found herself, for the first time, not waiting for the next loss, but accepting what remained. Tomorrow would come. For now, that was enough. The first pale blush of spring touched Oak Haven in small ways, grass shivering through cracks in the asphalt, the soft percussion of meltwater trickling from the station's eaves. For the first time in weeks, Becca left the office window cracked, letting the scent of damp earth drift through the rooms, letting the sharpness of the world soften around the edges. The night's chill lingered, but the old dog settled by the door, eyes half closed, the last patch of sunlight warming his muzzle. Becca moved quietly through the gas station, her body remembering the rhythms of work, sweeping, wiping, putting things right. There were still places where the paint peeled, where the roof leaked, where time had left its bruises, but these things seemed smaller now, something to tend, not to fear. She stopped often, letting herself stand in the hush and simply notice. Harley's slow breath, the dust motes twisting in the late light, the way the shadows in the corners looked less like threats and more like a gentle invitation to rest. Outside, the world went about its business. Old Henry's mail truck coughed past. Mrs. Doyle paused at the curb, arm raised in greeting. A boy on a bicycle wheeled through a puddle, laughter ringing out, bright and sharp. Becca watched, her hand pressed to the glass, and felt, quietly, almost shyly, that she belonged, in a way that didn't need explanation. As evening crept in, Becca sat on the steps with Harley beside her, a mug of tea cooling in her palms. The wind was softer now, coaxing the scent of pine and gasoline across the lot. She listened, the sigh of branches, the whistle of a far-off train, the familiar creak of the sign above her head. She traced the calluses on her fingers, remembered the map of scars that was her own life. For a long time she had counted them as evidence of failure, but tonight they seemed more like proof of persistence, of care, of simply staying when leaving would have been easier. Harley shifted closer, pressing the weight of his head to her knee. She reached down, felt the warmth of his fur, the surety of his heartbeat, the steady rhythm that had anchored her through so many unspoken nights. Lights flickered in the windows as dusk deepened. The station glowed gold and soft, a beacon for no one in particular. Becca found herself moving through the rooms, drawing the blinds, setting the kettle to boil. She paused at her father's journal, lying open on the desk. A name scrawled in the margin, a note she'd missed before. Home is what you make it, not what you inherit. She smiled, thumb brushing the page. She closed the book, not in anger, but with a kind of gratitude, a thank you said too late, but said all the same. The night pressed close, gentle rather than ominous. Harley circled once, settled by the door. Becca poured 2 mugs, one for herself, one bowl for him, and set them on the table. She left the door ajar just a little, letting in the night air, the sound of crickets, the scent of what might come. She sat in the quiet, listening for nothing in particular, watching the lamplight pool and scatter across the worn floorboards. Harley's tail thumped softly, a contentment that needed no words. Outside, the world kept moving. Cars on distant roads, laughter from a porch, a lone owl tracing circles in the blue-black sky. Inside, Becca leaned back. Let herself be held by the moment. Let the silence fill her without fear. She thought of the years lost, of secrets buried, of the wounds that healed crooked and slow. She thought of the clearing, the stones warmed by the sun, of Harley's unwavering gaze, of her father's stubborn love, flawed, silent, unfinished. She did not know what tomorrow would bring. There would be more repairs, more small disappointments, perhaps even more threats waiting in the shadows. But tonight, there was peace. Peace made of ordinary things. The soft click of Harley's claws on the linoleum, the taste of tea gone cool, the certainty of being needed and quietly chosen. As she rose to turn off the lights, Harley beat her to the door, standing sentinel in the threshold, head turned toward the street, tail sweeping a slow arc. Becca paused beside him, looking out into the night, breathing in the crisp air, feeling, at last, the unclenching of something long held tight. No grand ending, no final revelation. Just a woman, a dog, a station full of memories, and the smallest, most stubborn light holding at the door. And in the morning, they would begin again.